All right, I hope you're comfortable because we have a lot to talk about in this video. In terms of considerations for if you decide to register a new organization. But before we start, the most important thing I want to tell you is that you don't necessarily have to form a new organization. Remember, that's not the goal. So let's think about a few options first. You can innovate as an entrepreneur. If you work in an existing nonprofit or for-profit organization, you can pitch your endeavor internally, get a budget for it, get a team for it. There are a lot of pros and cons. Some of the pros are that you have access to existing resources, to existing internal operations and overhead and administrative resources, and you have access to customers and people, and you have a platform of communications. So you may be able to get a lot more done. And you don't have to think about all the admin about creating a new organization. It's really costly to do that. The cons, of course, is that it might actually move slower, so you have less freedom than within a startup to make decisions and move fast and accelerate because there's existing people who run this organization that you're entrepreneuring in, and they're going to be involved in the decision making, so you can't, just do whatever you want. You have to spend a lot of time convincing them. But honestly, sometimes that happens with startups too. So consider whether you can do this as an entrepreneur, as a venture within an existing organization. The second option is that you can incubate within an existing organization at first to save on startup costs, and then spin out if and when you need to, like if you're raising your own money or whatever. An example of that is Riders for Health. And so Riders for Health was incubated within Mercy Corps, and what they do is that they help health workers get around and transport equipment and maintain their fleet and all sorts of things related to last mile delivery. So that's the second option, is that you can incubate within an existing organization and then spin out. Third, rather than register as a new organization just to be able to accept funding, you can actually have something that's called a fiscal sponsor. So you can just be a project, not an organization. But there's an existing nonprofit organization that is already registered that can sponsor you. So they are your legal entity, and they are who donors send the money to. And they do a lot of the admin that you would need to do if you started a new organization. So that's a third option that you can consider. Now, if for whatever reason you decide to register a new organization, that's what we're going to talk about in the rest of the video. So we're going to review some of the basic options to help you get started in figuring out what legal registration form might be a good fit for you. So the first option is a charity. This is a good fit if you're seeking to raise philanthropic capital. And each country has its own version. So in the US, it's called most commonly the 501c3. And this means that if someone donates to you, it's tax deductible. So they deduct that donation from their income and pay less taxes. In the UK, there's four major structures: the unincorporated association, the charitable incorporated organization, charitable company, and trust. So every different country has its own. Like in Lebanon, where I come from, it's usually an association. It's called a charitable association. So check for the options in your country and also check for the nuances in your country. For example, in the US, you actually register a nonprofit in your state, so you form your legal status by state, but then you seek your tax-exempt charitable status federally. So it's a little bit different, and you need to know how to navigate these things. So that's charity. The second option is business. So if you want to distribute surplus revenues to individuals and funders, then this is going to be a good match for you. In the US, social entrepreneurs most commonly register as an LLC or a C Corp, a limited liability company or a corporation. In the UK, the most common is a company limited by guarantee or shares, and this is similar to the LLC and the C Corp. And again, if you're going to register as a business, then to ensure your social enterprise status if you don't have a legal registration option in your country that's specialized for social enterprises, you want to write your mission into your articles of association, constitution, some kind of rules or memorandum. Most countries, there is no specialized social entrepreneurship structure. Now, how do people navigate this? So one way is that there are hybrid structures where you have one of each, a charity and a business. You can either have the charity own and register a new business, and that's what Sufra did. Remember, they had the Women's Program Association, then they registered a business for their food truck. And then other social entrepreneurs have found really innovative ways to manage the requirements and trade-offs of different legal registration options. So one really cool example that comes to mind is Group SOS. It's a French association that's comprised of several nonprofits that came together as an association. And many of these nonprofits own commercial subsidiaries. So the commercial activities of these subsidiaries provide livelihoods for marginalized populations, like how we called the Type 2 social enterprise. And also the profits from the commercial activities fund the complementary social programs. And the organizations came together and formed an executive board with representatives from each of the founding nonprofits, and a management alliance that optimizes management across the different bodies in areas like finance, accounting, human resources, and communications, so that you don't have different people in different organizations doing the same work, redundantly. And then another way people have done it since the beginning of time is through cooperatives. So here, the organization is owned by a membership composed of a group of different stakeholders. This has been a historical practice around the world and also is gaining popularity now with the new generation. And there's so many examples, like in Kenya, cooperatives operate a lot of the coffee and the cotton market. They account for about half of gross domestic product. In Argentina, over a third of the population is part of a cooperative, is a member. In Colombia, cooperatives provide a lot of microcredit programs or microloans. In France and Japan, 9 out of 10 farmers are members of a cooperative, so it's been used a lot in agricultural setting. In Denmark, more than a third of the consumer retail market is held by consumer cooperative. And in New Zealand, there are many industries dominated by cooperative enterprises. And now let's talk about some of the newer legal registration options that have started to emerge most recently that are more tailored to social entrepreneurs. Again, these aren't really commonly found in most countries, but they're starting to emerge, and you might end up playing a huge role in advocating for these. So in the US, some states have an L3C, which is a low-profit LLC. It stands for low-profit limited liability company. And then there's also the public benefit corporation, which some people call the B Corp. So it kind of sounds like the counterpart of the C Corp, but there's a little bit more nuance to it than that, and I'm going to focus on it more in the case study. The public benefit corporation is legally obliged to consider social, environmental, and economic outputs, so it has a triple bottom line. Then a newer option is the flexible purpose corporation that's available in California, last time I checked, and Washington, a state in the US, where it's called the Social Purpose Corporation. And this legal form requires boards and management to agree on one or more social and environmental purposes with shareholders, while providing additional protection against liability for directors and management in making decisions that do not maximize profit for shareholders. And that is huge. That's like changing the face of capitalism, basically. Now, as you can see, these legal forms depend on the state, and they're still nascent in the US. In the UK, there's a common legal option for social enterprises. Actually, it's called the Community Interest Company. And this was created specifically for social enterprises, and it's regulated by the government to ensure that they don't deviate from social objectives. So in a sense, the UK is a bit ahead of the US in this game. And around the world, there are lots of global variations. So most countries don't have a specific legal registration option that's specialized in social enterprises, but some do, and it's starting to increase. And I'm not an expert in these, but you can check with some social enterprises in your country to learn more. What I have heard is that in China, civilian-run non-enterprise units and social welfare enterprises are examples of options that haven't yet been leveraged as much as traditional for-profit enterprises, but could be options in the future. And then in India, nonprofit trusts or societies have been prevalent historically in the social landscape. But social entrepreneurs are increasingly turning to the for-profit options like a private limited company. And the last thing I'll say is that sometimes social entrepreneurs, rather than registering in the country they're operating in, might register in the country they're raising funds in. Or they might register locally and in another country to help fundraise in that other country. And then lastly, I'll end by saying that regardless of registration, there's a growing movement where regular businesses that may not necessarily identify and operate as social enterprises strive to create positive social and environmental outcomes alongside their financial outcomes. And some social entrepreneurs are actively fostering and nurturing such networks and communities. So there are a lot of considerations. The laws are constantly changing, and it's really just important to talk to other people in figuring this out. It's nice to have some insight from people who have practiced this personally. So talk to your peers, find social entrepreneurs who have navigated the legal landscape in your country, and talk to a lawyer. You can have a consultation with a lawyer. You can try to find a law firm that provides reduced or pro bono services for social entrepreneurs. Some universities have law clinics where their law school students might be able to support you. So definitely think about this topic earlier rather than later.